Did y'all hear that? Welcome to the Rotary Club of Beaumont, the 72nd club founded in the world where our members serve to change lives. I understand that y'all had an unofficial Rotary meeting last week without me. I'm not sure if that is, and I understand y'all had a better time. Thank you, Vice President Uliana Trelowski, for presiding over this group of clowns, but thank you. Those on Zoom, we're asking you to please mute your microphone now. Please take a minute, if you would, and check in on your MySpace page so that everyone would know you're here. On April 2nd, 1913, the subject of Rotary program was lumber, something tangible like real estate, something easily valued. It has become common in the 108 years since for our programs to focus on the economic drivers of our local economy. In recent years, we've learned about plant expansions and riverway widenings. Today, our guest speakers are attending by Zoom to explain the economics of cryptocurrency. Sounds space age, doesn't it? To lead our invocation, Deborah Tomov, she's the Executive Director of Family Services of Southeast Texas, pledges by Catherine Fuller, Financial Advisor Edward Jones, introduction of guests, Joey Cressman, President, Cool Technology Solutions. Deborah?
Hello, let's bow our heads. Father God, we wanted to thank you for allowing us to fellowship today. I pray that you give us a chance to appreciate each other and our work in this community. I pray for the Rotarians around the globe that are not well. Please continue to place your healing hands on them and heal them. Thank you for this beautiful day and bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies. We give you all the glory and the honor in your name. Amen.
Please join me in the pledge to our nation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And to the great state of Texas. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
If I could have the guest and the host stand, we have Matt Uding, guest of Uliana Trelowski. We have Shelley Burns, guest of Rhonda Marks. We have Stacy Dykes, guest of Ty Codring. We have Laura Cressman, guest of Joey Cressman. Kim Johns, proposed Rotarian. Vadisha Worley, guest of Robert Worley. Ross Hare, guest of Chuck Hare. Kim Tran, guest of Deborah Tomov.
Thank you, Joey. Thank you, guests, for being here with us. Thank you, Rotarians, for inviting your friends and neighbors and people you know that would make great Rotarians. I'm glad that you're here. So you might notice that Jackie Chapman is not with us today. She was taken out of town by President-elect Joanne Brown and held captive there until she changes her mind. We cannot stand her retirement, so we'll hold her captive there. If we fail, our plans are underway to search for executive director. The position announcement will be made available on the website and on social media posts. We'll be accepting resumes from qualified applicants until the close of business on October 27th. That's a pretty quick timeline because we want to have this position filled by December 1st. So if you have an idea of someone that may be a qualified candidate and would love the Rotarian, the position as Executive Director of Rotary Club of Beaumont, please point them to our website where you'll see the announcement. We have an excellent search committee. You've heard me speak about them. And we want to get someone on site working with Jackie for a couple of weeks before Jackie leaves us. Unless Joanne is successful in this quest. We have a committee announcement from John Lee on community service project. John?
Good afternoon. On Saturday, October 23rd, we will be delivering beds for Sleep in Heavenly Peace. Talked to you about that last week, and I will do it one more time. But we need some volunteers, and we need some volunteers with trucks, if at all possible. Each team needs to have one truck. But we will meet at 2950 Milam for Sleep in Heavenly Peace at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning, October 23rd, to go out and do the deliveries. And again, this is a joint project between the Rotary Club of Beaumont, the Rotary Club of Port Arthur, 100 Black Men of Greater Beaumont, and the Lamar Rotaract Club. So please come out and enjoy the fellowship, and also let's make a change in the lives of some kids in our town. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I encourage you to show up to speak to us about Vocational Excellence Awards, Board Member and Chair Mary Poole.
Well, good afternoon, Rotarians. You've heard about it. You read about it. Well, now's the time for our Vocational Excellence Awards program. You guys might remember we have not been able to do this for 2 years. 2 years ago, we were flooded out at the Elegante. Last year, the stinking COVID. So this year, we are 5 weeks away, and it looks like it just might happen. This is one of our favorite events each and every year, and it's a way that we can make a difference to those out in our community. So I'd like to set the stage for you, if you would allow me just a few minutes. I want you to put your fork down, and I just want you to listen, take everything else out of your mind, and hopefully it'll make someone come to mind that you would like to nominate. So what if someone were to make a documentary of your hands? What if you were to tell the story based on the life of your hands? What would others see? Would it begin with the fist of an infant, then a close-up of a tiny hand wrapped around your mother's finger? Then what? Holding onto a chair as you learn to walk? If you showed this documentary to your friends, you'd be proud of certain moments. Your hands extending with a gift, placing a ring on a loved one's finger, caring for a patient or a family member, making a meal, or simply giving a hug. When we take the time to manage our hands, they become instruments. Instruments used to make a difference, to perform a random act of kindness, or simply to perform service above self. So here's the challenge to each and every one of you. If you choose to accept it, show us the hands that make Southeast Texas a better place to live, learn, play, and pray. So I know you're all inspired right now, and you're ready to grab those nomination forms on your table, but stop and wait, because there's some training involved. It's extensive training, and you must do it before you can make a nomination. So sit back, relax, and prepare to be amused. So I'm going to give you the instructions, but right now I want y'all, hey, the show's for me right now, ladies. Hang on, wait a minute. So this is extensive, so I want you to kind of limber up your shoulders and your arms, because we're getting ready to do some work. Are y'all ready? Okay, the back table, y'all need to wake up from your nap. The old farts, eyes on me. Jay, quit looking into the eyes of your beautiful bride. All eyes on me. So are you ready? Let's see, y'all ready? All right, 1, 2, 3. Put your right hand in, you put your right hand out. You put your right hand in and you shake it all about. Your hand goes in the air to show them that you care. And that's what it's all about. Wow. Did y'all see all those hands in the air? we are going to have a load of nominations. I cannot wait. So your training is complete, which was no simple feat. The time right now in here to show them that we care. So let me give you just a little bit of instructions and then I'll get out of your way. Applications are on your table. Please take a minute to fill them out. We will remind you again next Wednesday, which is the 20th. We will remind you again the next Wednesday, which is the 27th. That is the deadline. The big event will be right here on Wednesday, November 13th. Remember, we haven't done this for 2 years. So if you have made a nomination in the past, over the past 2 years, we're going to need you to make that nomination again. Some folks have left the area, and unfortunately, we lost one nominee to COVID. So things are changed. So if you did make a nomination, we ask that you make it again. If you're thinking, did I make a nomination? I have the list, and I also have who you nominated. So see me afterwards. If you have any questions, we'll be around after the meeting today. And special thanks to my committee, Lynn Hill, Bobby Applegate, Tish Cornell, and Cheryl Bellew. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, it is indeed my pleasure to introduce our guest speakers today. Joining us today by Zoom, Chris Montoya. He's a chartered financial analyst, he is executive vice president of First Financial Trust, and he's an equities manager. He's the senior portfolio manager of the equity income portfolio. Chris is visiting us from his office in Abilene. Trent Martin, chartered financial analyst, chartered alternative investment analyst, is vice president of First Financial Trust and equity portfolio manager. Trent is co-manager of the core and strategic growth portfolios. Trent is visiting with us from his office in San Antonio. Chris Montoya.
The floor is mine. Well, thank you, Brad, and it's an honor to be here today with all of you. And as you mentioned in your opening remarks, it's definitely a different and new way of being able to be together with all of you. And but I will say though, Brad, initial comment, the meeting from 108 years ago on speaking about the importance of lumber, looking at home prices, I think we could still have that presentation. It would be very relevant again today, still 108 years later. So, you know, very important topic. But I think what we're going to speak about today is definitely something new. It's definitely something unusual, and something that, quite frankly, most people, including many financial professionals, still don't have their full arms around on what exactly does it mean. But I think that's one of the things that makes us at First Financial pretty unique as an asset manager, that given our team first and foremost, we believe in having, you know, long tenured, lifelong relationships with our clients. And that also means by having, you know, low employee turnover. So I'm honored to be able to manage and oversee a group of folks that, you know, have been with our company quite some time. I've been with First Financial, you know, almost 20 or over 20 years. Trent has been with us almost 14. And I think our least tenured person on the investment squad has been with us 11 years. So we've been together and have had some many good times together as a team, and we look forward to many more. But I think another thing that makes us pretty unique is, in order to be able to build comprehensive portfolios that really meet all of the needs of your clients, we have to, number one, have product availability that meet many different strategies that could, you know, match up with those unique needs that your client may have. But then second of all, you have to have a well-informed opinion, and you also have to have done the hard groundwork to determine what is the valuation of all the various assets that are available to put into a portfolio. And based on that, how do they all interact with one another, and which ones are the best for your client? And so we have a team that not only manages, as you heard from Brad's introduction, many different strategies, but we also have teams that have analysts that go deeper into the weeds, whether it's specific economic sectors, certain segments of the fixed income market, certain segments of the equity market. The goal of our entire team is always to have dedicated professionals who are truly experts into their field of the market that can give us the best insight as to where those opportunities for success lie for our clients. And so one of those newer aspects of the market is cryptocurrency. And just like we are doing things, new and different by the use of Zoom, we are also, looking at things that, quite frankly, just a few months ago, to be perfectly frank, many of the people on the investment team really didn't have a good grasp of, didn't understand why is it even relevant, and then most importantly, does it even have any value? So with that, I will turn it over to Trent. So I will turn it over from the 3rd floor here in Abilene to the 12th floor there in San Antonio. So Trent, take it away, my man.
All right, that's perfect. Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate that introduction from both you and Brad. I want to start off by saying that I'm actually going to save the email blast that went out for this meeting, because I think that's the first time I've ever seen my name and the word expert used in the same sentence. So I'm going to make sure and show that to my wife. I think she'd get a kick out of that. But as you know by now, our topic of conversation today are cryptocurrencies. And as Chris alluded to, this is an area where we've done a lot of research and analysis, particularly in the last year or so. But it's very much an area that we're continuing to do our homework on. And I think that we would be the first to acknowledge that, while we've learned a lot, we don't know everything. And we would also be very quick to recognize that this is an area that is still new, like Chris mentioned, and that as of now, there's still room for multiple viewpoints on this subject. And so we're going to kind of share what we've learned and kind of what our initial conclusions are. But again, I think there's plenty of room for discussion and debate on this topic. I'll also kind of piggyback on what Chris said and add that, we are a fiduciary for our clients. And what that means is that we're held to the highest sort of standard that exists within the financial service industry. And, we are legally bound to act in a manner that is prudent and in the best interest of our clients. And so if our tone today comes across as a little bit conservative, then that kind of explains why also. So I'm going to start our presentation by sharing my screen. See if I can make that happen. Okay, so you should be able to see that by now, I would hope.
Yep, looks good, Trent.
Okay, thank y'all. Okay, so jumping into our presentation here, I've got about 10 slides that we'll run through pretty quickly. I know we don't have just a ton of time this afternoon, and we'd like to save a few moments for some questions at the end. So first, I'll just pause to kind of let the beauty of this PowerPoint sort of wash over you there, but hopefully the content will be better than the appearance. But kind of what we've got here are a presentation that has 2 parts. And the first is just, attempting to answer the question of what are cryptocurrencies. And then in the second half, we're going to pivot and we're going to focus on kind of what is most important for people in our line of work, which are the investment considerations surrounding cryptocurrencies. And so that kind of deals with, okay, how do these new assets perform in a portfolio context, and how can we use them to help our clients if possible. And so as Chris mentioned, that's an area that we're really focused on. But to get to there, we have to have at least a fundamental understanding of what these things are in the first place. So I'm going to start off with just the basic definition, which you can see is that cryptocurrencies are a form of digital currency that is secured by cryptography, which is a kind of numerical encryption. All right. And these were designed to increase payment efficiency by enabling rapid transfer of money across digital networks. And so that initial definition may not tell you everything you need to know, but I want to make one quick point here and say that when you think about the concept of money itself and what that represents, is that basically that was developed as a way to help people who found that a barter system wasn't the most efficient way to conduct business. Basically, people learned very early on that exchanging goods and services wasn't as easy as just exchanging a currency. That made things a lot more efficient. And so as a result, coins have been around for the majority of human history. And about 1,000 years or so ago, we began to see paper money be used. And so now in our current world and in the economy that we exist in today, as we know, our world is more digitally integrated with each passing year. And so it kind of just stands to reason and it would almost be considered just an inevitable thing that money itself would also eventually be impacted by this digital transition that's occurring around the world. And so that's really what cryptocurrencies represent, and kind of an initial step in that direction. And so this whole process began about 15 years ago in 2007. And yes, it's hard to believe, but 2007 was 15 years ago now. But it began with the creation of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is still the most popular and largest cryptocurrency in terms of its value today. And Bitcoin was developed by someone using the name Satoshi Nakamoto. And so what that means is it's almost certainly a pseudonym, and it probably represents a group of people instead of an individual. So all that to say, no one knows who really created Bitcoin, but that is the person who took responsibility for it in the initial code that was released.
Hey, Trent, did I interrupt you?
Trent, I got a quick question for you, man. Are you still on the title slide, or are you deeper into your presentation?
I'm on the second page currently.
Oh, okay.
Is it not showing up?
We just see the title slide.
Okay, let me try this again. How about now?
There you go. All right, looks good.
All right, sorry about that. So it said that it had paused my screen share, and I'm not sure why that happened, so I apologize for the technical difficulty. I'll try and keep an eye on that to make sure that we keep that current. But now you should see the page that I'm referring to, and as luck would have it, I'm now at the end of that page. So the last thing I'll mention here is that Ethereum came to be a few years after Bitcoin was released. It was developed by a person named Vitalik Buterin, who is 100% a real person, and amazingly, he was just 19 years old when he released Ethereum. So very impressive there. So moving on, now you should be able to see the third page here. All right, that looks like that's working now. The next question we have to answer is, how do cryptocurrencies work? And there are a few key technological breakthroughs that have kind of made cryptocurrencies possible. And the first is a term that you've probably heard, which is blockchain. And so basically the problem is that, as you can see from the second bullet point there, if a digital currency is just lines of computer code, then how do you prevent that code from being duplicated? And how do you keep track of who owns what? Basically, if someone has that code, can they continue to spend it multiple times and keep replicating it into infinity potentially? And that's a problem called double spending. And the way that this problem was addressed was via blockchain, which is basically just a ledger or a list that records transactions and is a running record of all payment activity on the network. And what that did is it made sure that everyone knew exactly how much currency was in existence, and so it couldn't be replicated. And then from there, you still have the problem of, okay, if that addresses the issue of double spending, what prevents someone from attempting to falsify this blockchain record? And that was kind of the next major development, which was this concept of decentralization, the last bullet point there on this slide, where that blockchain record, that list of all transactions, isn't stored in a single location where it could be easily hacked or manipulated. It's instead stored across every location on the network. And so the example would be, if we were trying to go in and alter the final sentence in War and Peace, for example, well, you couldn't just do that in the master manuscript. You'd have to go into every library and bookstore in the country and make the change there. Same concept is being used here with this idea of decentralization. Being stored in multiple locations is kind of what helps protect the sanctity of that record. Here on our fourth slide, just kind of continuing that discussion of how cryptocurrencies work. So we know now, based on what we just discussed, that cryptocurrencies depend on a running list of transactions. That's the blockchain. And that this list is copied across all the computers on the network instead of a single location. And that's the idea of decentralization. But then we have the issue of how are new transactions processed. And the act of processing new transactions is something you may also have heard, which is the idea of cryptocurrency mining. And essentially what this refers to is adding new transactions to the blockchain record. And it's called mining because it's something that's very computationally intensive. And essentially what happens is that new transactions are grouped together, and then they're assigned a unique identifier code, which is called a hash. And then all the computers on the network compete to guess that hash value, with the chances of successfully guessing the right value being around 1 in 20 trillion, okay? Then the winner, the so-called winner, is granted new cryptocurrency as a reward for their computational effort, and that's the term mining. So they didn't have to go dig in the ground to obtain new cryptocurrency, but they did have to exert a lot of computational effort and engage in this process of adding new transactions to the blockchain record. So clear as mud, right? You know, I think now it kind of makes sense to sort of pause here and summarize everything that we've discussed thus far, because it might still be a little bit fuzzy, but essentially we've discussed that cryptocurrencies are sophisticated programs that use a decentralized computer network to create a peer-to-peer payment system. What that means is that no single person or entity is in control of the network, and the primary function of these networks is just sending money from A to B, simple enough. We also know that they use blockchain technology to keep track of transactions and maintain the integrity of this record. That just means that, you know, the record is stored in multiple places, and that makes it harder to copy or to alter. And then finally, we know that they process new transactions via a mining process that intentionally requires a significant amount of computing power, and it creates new supply of the cryptocurrency at a slow and controlled rate. And so here the takeaway is that the network is made even more secure by the amount of computational difficulty associated with processing new transactions, and that this limited supply creates an element of scarcity, okay? Then to kind of round out our discussion about how cryptocurrencies work, you know, thus far our conversation is sort of centered on Bitcoin and Ethereum. And the reason is that those are still by far the largest cryptocurrencies in terms of value that are out there. I've got a screenshot here that I hope you can be able to see that shows that there's now over $1 trillion worth of value tied up in Bitcoin, about 400 billion in Ethereum, and then the next largest, Bitfinex, is 73 billion. And so those two at the top dwarf everything else on the list. I also wanted to highlight that the majority of these other coins actually use the Ethereum blockchain, and so they're basically based on that same platform. Lastly, I wanted to highlight one that is pretty popular, that has kind of gained a lot of kind of attention just kind of on social media and just culturally, which is Dogecoin. And Dogecoin was, you know, believe it or not, actually created as a joke by two software engineers who were kind of trying to make fun of or satirize what was going on with Bitcoin at the time. And since then, the person has come out and said that they regret ever doing that, because they never intended for their joke to be something that would eventually go on to represent $30 billion of other people's money. But that's the world we live in. So pivoting from there, that again, I hope gives you a little bit of background about how cryptocurrencies function, but where I really want to spend our time this afternoon is kind of on the investment considerations. And when you talk about cryptocurrencies, it brings up some sort of philosophical discussions that get into the nature of, okay, what defines an asset in the first place? And I think that we have a pretty good definition here with this first bullet point, which is the value of any asset is derived from its scarcity and or its utility. All right. Now, I think real estate is a prime example where we know it's scarce. All right. They're not making any more land, and it has a use. It has utility. It can be farmed. It can be used as a building site. It has multiple purposes, so it has utility as well. For cryptocurrencies, when you talk about scarcity and utility, it can be a little bit harder to nail down those definitions in the case of cryptos. And so, as we just talked about with the mining process and everything we discussed, we understand how each individual cryptocurrency limits its own supply. And, you know, people are quick to point out that nearly 90% of all the Bitcoin that will ever exist has already been mined. And so Bitcoin is very finite and very scarce. But during this time, 6,000 new cryptocurrencies beyond Bitcoin have already been created. And many of those actually go in and replicate some or all of Bitcoin's key features. And so while Bitcoin, its own algorithm can control the supply of new Bitcoin, what it can't do is control the creation of other competing cryptocurrencies. And so scarcity is a little bit hard to pin down there. But just for the sake of our argument today, let's assume that cryptocurrencies are inherently scarce. And if you make that assumption, I think the comparison to gold makes a lot of sense. And you may have heard cryptocurrencies referred to as digital gold at sometimes. And so I think the comparison to gold really holds up well because we know that both are a finite resource with somewhat limited real world utility. The supply of both increases at a very slow rate and will eventually run out. And both are viewed as a store of value, meaning that they're an asset that's designed to protect against inflation, okay? Now, I think that's a really important point to make because here, we talk about our cryptocurrencies, if they are digital gold, is that necessarily a good thing? Is that an endorsement or more of an indictment? And what I mean by that is that when we look back over time, what we find is that gold has underperformed the stock market throughout history. And over the last 50 years, gold has posted an annualized return of almost 8%, which isn't a bad number, but that meaningfully trails the annual return for the S&P 500 during that period of over 10%. And in the last 30 years, the difference has been even more pronounced, where the S&P 500 has gone on to return greater than 10% per year, but gold's return over the last 30 years has been less than 5% per year. And what that means is that if you'd invested $10,000 in both gold and the S&P 500 in September of 1991, you'd have $200,000 in the stock market at this point versus about $50,000 in gold. And so I want to kind of make a point here and say that in many ways, gold did its job. It increased in value, or at least held its value in dollar terms. We know that there was a lot of inflation that's occurred over the last 30 years, right? Our dollar today definitely doesn't go as far as it did in 1991. And so gold, if you'd invested in that, it did help preserve your purchasing power by increasing in value in dollar terms. It just didn't do it nearly as well as what the stock market did during that time. So my point is that gold is a decent inflation hedge, and by extension, cryptocurrencies might be a good inflation hedge, but historically, stocks have been an even better protection against inflation. From there, when we pivot from scarcity to then talk about utility, can you justify the value of cryptocurrencies based in the function that they provide, in their utility or their use? And I would still say that the number one use case for cryptocurrencies is payments. It's just sending money from A to B. And so there are some benefits associated with cryptocurrencies on this front. There's no need for currency conversion. There are fewer fees. They also provide total anonymity, which is important for some people. But there are also many shortcomings. And the first is that if you want to use Bitcoin as an example, its total bandwidth is just limited. And what I mean by that is that the Bitcoin network processed around 100 million transactions per year over the last several years. And that may seem like a big number, but for comparison, Visa processed 141 billion transactions last year. So that's 1,000 times more than Bitcoin. I also think it's very important to highlight that since Bitcoin's mining process is so energy intensive, meaning it requires a lot of computing power, which therefore requires a lot of electricity, that the Bitcoin network used 130 terawatt hours of electricity last year. That's about the same amount as some countries, including Norway and Argentina there, I used as examples. So the Bitcoin network using as much electricity as a small country. By comparison, Visa just used 0.21 terawatt hours of electricity. So that means that, in other words, Visa can process 1 million transactions with the energy required for a single Bitcoin transaction, 1,000,000 to 1. So the one thing that Bitcoin was designed to do, send money from A to B, it doesn't do very efficiently, at least compared to other things that currently exist elsewhere in the market. From there, we haven't talked about this very much thus far, but there are some who are beginning to use cryptocurrencies beyond their initial function as payment networks and try to apply them to a broader range of financial services, where they're trying to replicate existing financial services that we're familiar with just like lending money and simple functions like that, and now bring that over to the crypto world. And I think that has some merit, but there are still a lot of risks associated with that. The first few I'll highlight is that these markets are very much unregulated currently and very prone to error. Just last month, crypto platform called Bitfinex accidentally paid $24 million in transaction fees just to send $100,000 worth of crypto. Okay, so that I'm not saying that they spent $100,000 in fees to send 24 million. It's the opposite. They paid 24 million just to send 100,000 worth of crypto on the network. So not a good business decision there. Compound, which is another DeFi platform, also mistakenly distributed 160 million worth of crypto to a bunch of their users, and they don't have any other recourse than to just politely ask those people to return their funds. And so if you were an investor in that platform, you just saw 160 million go away, and you just have to hope that people will be nice and give it back. And so all that to say, this is a very unregulated part of the market still. And we have to remember that just in the U.S., there are about a dozen regulatory agencies that exist at the federal level, and several more at the state level. And so when you have something like this DeFi platform that is kind of undermining the financial system, that's obviously going to draw the attention of regulators. And so that kind of brings us to, as we get into kind of our final points here, what are the risks for crypto investors? And I think the first is just that, it's regulation. As I've written here, the Wild West days of cryptocurrencies are likely nearing an end. Governments around the world are trying to rein in this activity, and they're doing it for good reason. It's a meaningful drain on energy resources. It's a threat to their existing monetary and fiscal policy, and it represents a potential harm to investors. And President Biden has talked about this, and he has named cryptocurrencies as an area of focus amid the tax reform proposals that are currently being debated in Congress amid the budget reconciliation and the infrastructure bills that are out there. And we're also seeing what I would say is probably an extreme, but very much a real world example of this in China, where in September, China went ahead and moved to ban all transactions of cryptocurrencies in that country. And basically they're saying buying and selling cryptocurrencies, using a decentralized finance platform, engaging in cryptos of any kind is now an illegal financial activity in China. And so one of the reasons they're taking such a hardline stance, and this gets into our next point, is that they're trying to promote their own state-backed digital currency. They're currently in the process of testing a digital yuan, and this is a risk because it represents a threat of replication. And what I mean by that is that now other central banks around the world, including the U.S., could eventually look to develop their own digital currency and render the existing cryptocurrencies as obsolete, potentially if that's accompanied by really harsh regulation. And so that brings me to the final slide here, which is just our conclusions. And, I just kind of want to round out everything that we've discussed thus far by saying that as the global economy becomes more digitally integrated, I think it's very reasonable to assume that this digital shift will eventually extend further into money and payments. I think you can even make the case that, physical currency could potentially go away in our lifetimes. And so I think it's reasonable to have that expectation. At the same time, I think with governments and central banks around the world taking steps to regulate digital finance, it's uncertain what this new era will look like, and it's also uncertain what role existing cryptocurrencies will play in this new digital future of money, if any at all. And so I think that in the face of that uncertainty, one of the things that is often a prudent course of action is just to hedge against that uncertainty. And in this case, hedging against the uncertainty of what money might look like in the future could involve directly investing in cryptocurrencies. But for all the reasons we've discussed, given the risks associated with that, I would say that, that might not be the most prudent way to proceed in terms of hedging against that unknown. And as a result, our recommendation would be that investors only allocate an amount they would be willing to use in terms of directly investing in cryptocurrencies. Instead, what we would kind of advocate and what we think might be a more appropriate approach is to invest in actual companies that also stand to benefit from the digitization of money. As we've established, stocks are easier to value. They represent real ownership and profit streams and tangible assets. They're often a better hedge against inflation, and they can likely succeed in more scenarios than existing cryptocurrencies, meaning that you have more ways to be right. And so that would be the approach that we would advocate. And that's really what I've got here as far as our presentation this afternoon. So I'll pause here and see if we have any questions or discussion items.
Yeah, Trent, we do have one question that did come in via Zoom that I think that both you and I could easily answer, which was why would anyone want to use cryptocurrency given its wild swings in value? And I think that that is a very legitimate claim, as you showed in your presentation, which is not only do you never really know how much you're truly spending, but I'll go into another area that your presentation did not go into, which is what is considered to be legal tender. And in the United States, if you go and you use cash or you write a check or you use your credit card or your debit card, those are all deemed to be legal tender. And therefore, when you go and buy a pizza and it's, $20, that exchanges the money for the product, and all is said and done. But in the world of crypto, that's not considered to be legal tender. And so you actually have to report it as a gain or loss, meaning that since there is such wild swings in value, it is considered currently by the IRS to be a security. So think of it this way. If you own Apple stock and you go to Domino's to buy a pizza for $20 and you say, well, I don't have $20 on me. Well, you take some of my Apple stock and you give it to them. Well, you bought it at a price and now you just exchanged it for a price. So there is a gain or a loss. You have to show that to the IRS. It's the same thing with cryptocurrency. So one of the things that, it really doesn't jive is it a store of value, or as you showed in your presentation, Trent, is it truly a currency in of itself? And both arguments are having a difficult time getting traction, especially when you think about the rules of the game will ultimately be determined by the governments in the places in which you live and do business. And so that is one of the areas to where right now, I think the obvious answer beyond just what you showed in your presentation of it's not as efficient and there's not as many users on the platform, et cetera, that just the fact that it is deemed to be a security and not legal tender means you really would not be using this for your everyday transactions, which I'll conclude by saying, I think that gets to the heart of the point of your investment considerations, which is, many times we find in the world of technology, especially in the last, 40 years since the 1980s, that there are many great technology concepts that are created, but the companies that ultimately benefit from them are usually not the ones who initially invented them. It's somebody else who saw the value or the merit and then made it to where it was more mainstream. So to your point, I think that this has shown that, we're definitely living in a more digital world and that the use of cash or checks or things of that nature are continuing to decline. But if you can begin to replicate these same features in a Visa or a MasterCard or a PayPal or a Venmo, those are probably going to be the areas that ultimately see the benefit of this invention and not necessarily this particular area. So hopefully that answered the question for our person from Zoom. But Brad, do you have anybody in person that has any questions?
I'm polling the room. Any questions for Trent, for Chris? Yes, we have a question. So the question, Trent, is what happens when all 21 million of the Bitcoin are mined?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the vast majority of it, as we discussed, already has been mined. And so once it's all been mined, then there obviously won't be any new supply. But at that point in time, I'm not sure how Bitcoin will be able to continue as a payment network, meaning that if the mining process is currently what's used to facilitate new transactions, and is what sort of incentivizes people to use or allocate their computational power to the Bitcoin network, in knowing that they're going to be eventually paid in additional Bitcoin. Once all the Bitcoin is gone, then I think it would cease to exist as a payment network in that point. And then at that point in time, just be a standalone asset or store of value. So I don't think that it would continue to function as a payment network, or at least I'm not sure how that would continue at that point. So I think it would be more of a just kind of a relic at that point, honestly, for lack of a better word.
Thank you, Trent. Any other questions for Chris or Trent? Juliana? So Trent or Chris, I got an excellent question here from Uliana Trelowski, Vice President. What is the point of it all? Well, she goes on further, because we already have in existence a payment system that is useful and already recognized by the population.
I'll take that one, Brad. I will say that, number one, there's really three factors that's driving what I would call the growth, the activity, and then also the publicity around these cryptocurrencies. The first is people's belief politically, and that is they see year after year government deficits, and that the government continuously spends more than what they take in through taxes. And as borrowing goes higher and higher, they actually view that the government in of itself is creating its own source of inflation and therefore devaluing the dollar. And so they want something different from that. I think second of all, it's also being fueled a lot by our young people in this country and around the world, where they've grown up around digital assets and digital usage of things their entire life. And this is just another extension of it. Plus, given some of their age range, we're finding that many of the people who are active in the cryptocurrency space grew up in a time in which they've seen a lot of booms and busts in our country over the last 20, 25 years. And so their faith in what they could deem to be the establishment system is very low. And therefore, they actually like the outside source. And then finally, it's one that the government is very interested in, and it's very popular in the illicit activity community, those who are doing nefarious things, hackers, drug smugglers, all these other guys. It's really hard for you to be gaining, hundreds of millions of dollars every year through drug smuggling and find a way to hide all of that money. It's physical, you can see it. But if you can operate, in anonymity and move things around and then convert it, it makes laundering of illicit activity very easy. And so those three things are really fueling the rise of it. So I think that what you're finding right now, and the main player to pay attention to, and he's on CNBC quite a bit, President Biden named Gary Gensler as the head of the SEC. And goes back to my comment earlier where this is deemed to be a security, similar to trading a stock to buy a pizza rather than using cash, where it has to be reported on a gain-loss basis versus the IRS. Mr. Gensler taught the class on cryptocurrency at MIT, and at first people thought he was going to be very friendly since he was familiar with it. But the fact that he was so familiar with it, he actually knows a lot of the things that Trent mentioned here today, and that is it has features that can improve and enhance our financial system. But if it is done in an unregulated Wild West type manner, it actually creates instability in the system. And the biggest concern, as you saw from Trent's presentations, if there's already $1 trillion worth of value in Bitcoin, and then several hundreds of billions in Ethereum and other ones, that you begin to add all of this up, and it begins to have the same effects as what we saw with the financial system in 2008, that if this thing ever becomes truly delegitimized, that it could actually cause a loss of wealth that crimps confidence and therefore adversely affects economic activity. So Mr. Gensler right now is actually in the process of trying to develop more rules and regulations through the Biden administration to say there are features that are good and that need to be used to enhance the process, get more people into the financial service system because it is more inclusive and things of that nature. But it doesn't need to be done in a Wild West type fashion. And I think ultimately that might be its own undoing, where I said earlier, think about all the technology you've seen since the 1980s, in which the inventor was not the one who ultimately got the monetary benefit from it. It was some other player who was able to take those features and then mold it into an established product to really create an enhancement of value and usage for its customers. And so that's why, to Trent's point, you kind of go back to, is this really the answer, or did it kind of show us that, hey, it could be done better? But Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, PayPal, Venmo, all these other ones are going to be ultimate Square, et cetera, will ultimately be the ones who take those tidbits of features, embed it into their product that's already deemed to be legal, and therefore they are the ones who really benefit from all of this.
Thank you, Chris. I think that we all benefit from the presentation. Very informative. If we knew nothing before about cryptocurrency before today, we know a little bit more than nothing now. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate, with Jackie not being here, Laurel and Hardy operating the Zoom for us. Thank you. Chris and Trent, it really was a privilege to hear from you. The presentation seriously was informative, and in appreciation for you being here with us today. We're making a contribution to the Rotary Foundation into our annual fund that's designated to incentives for economic and community development. Thank you all. We're going to pay the Rotary Foundation in cryptocurrency. Suggestion from John Lee. Looking ahead, next week we're going to hear from Joe Magellani. He's the general manager of the Jefferson County Drainage District 6. He's going to give us a talk, making ARCs obsolete. So we're all about anticipating. We're hearing a lot about improvements to Drainage District 6. Remember to see Lynn Hill, after the meeting, if you want to become a ROAR volunteer, she's ready to help you through that process. It's easy. I could do it. I did it. So you can do it. And remember to take your nomination form that's left on your desk that Mary told you all about, the vocational award nomination. It is, as she said, a highlight of our Rotary year. I hope you make a nomination, you participate in doing that. Remember, the deadline is October 27th. Thank you to all of our guests for being here today. And remember, Rotarians, everyone bring one. Thank you to Deborah and Catherine and Joey for your presence at the head table. You represent us well. And remember our theme, everyone bring one. Please stand as you say the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, second, third, and fourth. Thank you so much. And remember, if you see Joanne, tell her she's done her job if we can keep Jackie.